Okay, so good evening, grade 11. So welcome for nasa part 2 na tayo ng lesson 4. So last time, diniscuss ni Miss Vicente yung about sa literary and biographical context. Tama ba? Ayan. So for today, we will discuss about the literary reading through a linguistic and sociocultural context. So, ayun yung pinaka part 2. So, tungkol saan ba yung linguistic and sociocultural context? So, first is linguistic context. So, what is linguistic context? So, it is a discourse that surrounds a language, units, and helps to determine its interpretation. So, linguistic context, it refers to the context. So, last time discuss ni Miss ko ano ba yung context, diba? So, it refers to the context na kung saan nakakatulong siya para mas maintindihan or mas ma-interpret natin yung idea ng isang text. For example, sa sentence, sa paragraph, o kaya sa phrase. So, practically, di ba, tayo, everything we do, lagi tayong nag-express through language. So, linguistic context, reading through a linguistic context focuses on the language. So, kung paano ba ginagamit, ano yung gamit nun, at saka, ano ba yung gustong or ano yung pinaparating na ibig sabihin. Okay? So, next. So, we have the following are some strategies you may use to read a text through the linguistic context. So, first is analyze the diction or choice of words in the context. So, ayan. Tingnan nyo muna or analyze nyo muna kung ano yung bigkas, ano yung choice of words in the text, ano-ano yung mga ginamit na salita. Ayan. So, paano ba siya bibigkasin? Ayan. Next bullet is examine the text syntax or use of sentences, clauses, phrases, line cuts, and etc. So, dito naman sa pangalawa is examine. Ayan. So, tignan yung gamit ng wika or yung mga use na sentence or clauses. Tama ba siya? Or related ba? Ayan. Next is observe the use of figurative language. So, when you say figurative language, for example, metaphor, personification, simile, ayan. So, yun yung mga salita na malalalim or mga matatalinghagang salita. Ayan. Yung paggamit nun. Next is analyze the mood and tone of the text. Ayan. So, dito, ano ba yung mood na speaker or ng author? Happy ba? Sad ba? And how about the tone? Positive ba yung text or negative yung text? Ayan. And then, observe the text overall structure. So, overall structure, tama ba yung pagkakaayos ng bawat sentence niya? Ayan. Or mga salita. Ayan. Next is, and the last one is, analyze the content of the text. So, sa content of the text naman, syempre, yung nilalaman ng text, importante, kailangan related dun sa pinaka-text. For example, yung theme niya. So, syempre, dapat related yun dun sa pinaka-text or dun sa pinaka-idea or point of view. Next is, I have here an example of linguistic context. So, the title is Puppy Love. So, excerpt lang siya by Francisco Sionil Jose. So, basahin natin. ito yung ano niya, excerpt lang siya kaya medyo maikli siya. So, we returned close to midnight from district competition in a fleet of carretelas and parted in the schoolhouse, where lived the odds and ends we use the athletes, their athletic equipment. We won in the dance competition. I walked Gina to her house. February, and the cool night had a full moon sailing in the sky. I was hungry, and so was she. We met a few townspeople on their way from the movie house, and they asked us how we fared. And we won, Gina, gosh. I want to stay with Gina, but upon approaching their house, all lights were on. They had some guests, and I was too shy to go, although I doubted very much if there was any food in their house. Ayan. So, yun yung pinaka nilalaman ng puppy love. So, ano yung explanation tungkol dun sa story niya? So, yung explanation niya is Puppy Love by Francisco Sionil Jose is a story of love. So, love story siya ni sino to? Gina, and yung pangalan ng lalaki is Jacobo. So, love story of love, tragedy. So, alam naman natin kung ano yung tragedy. So, ito yung hindi ganun kaganda or hindi happy ending. And revelation and hope. So, the story is called from Filipino life. So, syempre, ano pa rin yan? Syempre, yung author, Filipino. So, Filipino din yung, buhay ng Filipino yung ano niya dyan. So, it uses simple words. So, sabi nga, di ba kanina dun sa, analyze the words and choice of words. So, figure of speech, and for example, is full moon sailing in the sky. So, that is one example of figure of speech. And sensory images. So, dito, the authors knows how to play with the language where the readers can visualize the subjects. So, characters or setting in that way, they can understand its underlying meaning. Ayan. So, through language, ayan. So, na-visualize ng reader kung ano yung gustong iparating nung so, through language, na-visualize ng readers kung ano yung gustong iparating ng story. Okay? So, for example, yung full moon sailing in the sky. So, ni-imagine nyo, diba, na-visualize nyo kung ano yung itsura nung full moon sailing in the sky. Siyempre, full moon, tapos, siyempre, gabi yan. Ayan. So, yun yung gusto ko iparating dun sa full moon sailing in the sky. So, next tayo. So, the next is Lyric 17 by Jose Garcia Villa. Okay, first poem must be magical, then musical as a seagull. It must be brightness, moving, and hold secret, a bird's flowering. It must be slender as a bell, and it must hold fire as well. It must have the wisdom of bows, and it must kneel like a rose. It must be able to hear the luminance of dove and deer, and it must be able to hide what it seeks like a bride, and over all I would like to hover God smiling from the poem's cover. So, naiintindihan nyo ba yung yung lyric 17? Yeah. So, meron din explanation yan. So, yung interpretation. So, the interpretation of the poem lyric 17 by Jose Garcia Villa surrounds language unit that helps effectively determine the meaning of the text. So, this poem is about the qualities make poetry good, and then the author, in my opinion, is trying to convey the right qualities that are required in the poem to make it satisfactory. So, lyric 17 by Jose Garcia Villa. So, siya yung author nun ng poem na yon. So, sa poem na to, malalaman natin kung ano ba yung mga good qualities ng isang poem. So, dinidiscuss nyo din dito, or pinapakita nyo dito, kung ano yung passion niya pagdating sa pagsusulat ng poem. Okay? So, kung gaano siya kagaling, ano ba yung magandang qualities ng isang poem. Yan. So, next is, what more the language he uses is fanciful, and the metaphors, rhyming couplets indicates the thoughts put behind his works. Ayan. So, di ba, ayan, balikan natin ulit yung isa. Sabi niya dyan is, what more language he uses is fanciful. When you say fanciful, syempre, yung mga matatalinghagang salita, ayan. And then, the metaphors, rhyming couplets. Ayan. So, rhyming couplets. So, ayan. Meron dito, ayan, to hear and dear. So, yun yung mga magkakatunog, yung nag-rhyme siya. Ayan, ano pa ba? Ayan. Ayan, magical and gal. Moving, flowering. Tapos, bell, it must be slender as a bell, and then yung well. Ayan. Bows and rose, and here and dear. And namali lang siguro ako ng dyan, pagkakalagay. Pero yun yung tinatawag na rhyming couplets. Yan. So, in the poem, the term musical as a seagull may indicates that the poem should be rarity. When you say rarity, ito yung mga salitang pambihirang salita or mga hindi natin naririnig sa mga kadalasan na pakikipag-usap, or hindi pa naririnig. Yan. So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng rarity. So, or something unheard. Then, of a diamond in the rough, very much alike how one has never heard of musical seagull. So, the poem similarly should also be fluent. Yan. Next. Wait lang, ayusin ko. Yan. So, yung first is, meanwhile, brightness moving may indicate how poem should not be dark. It should be optimistic and pleasant. It should not be constant. It should not be constant. Rather captivating and intriguing to one's reader. So, dapat daw kapag susulat ka ng poem, dapat daw is optimistic. Hindi siya dapat dark or dull na gano'n. Dapat optimistic siya or positive and pleasant. And then it should not be constant or parang para makuha natin yung interest ng mambabasa, yung hindi siya magkakaparehas. Okay? Yun yung gusto kong iparating doon. So, brightness, moving. Ayan. Next is so, the phrase holds secrets of birds flowering is a metaphor that indicates towards the hatching of birds young from egg. This represents showing a new perspective to reader, and the poem should inspire its audience to think and not merely to be able to its meaning from merely reading it. Ayan. So, hold the secrets of birds flowering. Okay, so dyan, nagpapakita ng new perspective or pananaw or bagong pananaw para sa mga readers. So, and how the poem should inspire its audience. Ayun yung ibig sabihin ng holds secrets birds flowering. So, dapat yung perspective or dapat bago siya. Okay? And next is fire as well represent wit and brain in a poem that makes a poem interesting and not dull. So, fire as well represent wit and brain. Syempre, di ba, kapag pinag-iisipan yung isang poem, magiging interesting siya, tsaka magiging maganda siya talaga. So, at hindi magiging dull sa mga readers, hindi siya magiging pangit, di ba? Next is slender as a bell. So, refers to how bells have multiple sizes. Okay, so when you say slender as a bell, this means that a poem message is not enough to be able to understand by readers. Yan. So, sapat lang siya para maintindihan ng readers yung message ng poem. Kasi nga, gumamit siya ng mga simpleng salita. Gumamit lang naman siya ng mga simpleng salita na pag-iisipan mo pa rin. Okay? Ayan. Then next is wisdom of bows. Sorry. So, wisdom of bows has multiple meanings such as firstly, the tradition of bowing, secondly, archery, and lastly, ribbon tying. So, ayan yung process kung paano yung sa archery. And all things that are in different areas and hold symbolism, such as bowing being a form of respect, archery being a skill that can be used as a form of leisure or someone's livelihood, and bows something for aesthetic purposes. So, wisdom of bows. So, parang ibig sabihin niya dyan, for example, di ba, kapag pumapana tayo, kailangan alam natin kung saan natin siya direktang patatamaan, di ba? Para din siya sa poem. So, kailangan kapag nagsusulat ka, alam mo kung sino yung gusto mong direct to the point, okay? So, hindi dapat hindi ka dapat naliligaw or hindi dapat naliligaw yung idea mo, okay? So, yun yung wisdom of bows. Next. So, kneel like a rose indicates humility in beauty and strength. While a rose is beautiful, it has unseen strength in thorns, and kneeling indicates submission, thus subsequently referring to humility. Ayan. So, kneel like a rose is a metaphor for humility. Okay? So, all fine people are humble, and poems should also be humble. Okay, so kapag nagsusulat tayo, syempre kailangan maging humble tayo. And syempre, dapat yung sinusulat din natin is humble din siya. Okay? Ayan. Para ang tawag dito, mas interesting siya. Okay? Na basahin. Okay. Next is, meanwhile, must be able to hear. Shows that the poem must be sensitive and be able to sense its readers while guiding and appeal to its audience with more than visual imagery. Ayan. So, must be able to hide and seek like a bride. So, kung mapapansin nyo, diba, kadalasan sa mga poem, pag binabasa natin, be able to hear. So, dito, nagpapakita dapat yung poem ng pagiging sensitive sa mga readers, sa mga nararamdaman nila. Importante, dapat nakaka-relate tayo dun sa nararamdaman or maging sensitive tayo dun sa mga mambabasa natin. Lagi natin iisipin yung tawag dito? Iisipin nila, okay, about doon sa poem or doon sa binabasa or sa text. Ayan. Saan na? Ayan, next is luminance of dove and deer. So, possible gives references to how a deer symbolizes gentleness and a dove purity. Ayan. So, syempre, luminance of dove and deer. So, luminance naturally means brightness. Diba? And then, deer symbolizes gentleness and the dove, purity. Ayan. So, yun yung gusto kong iparating dyan. Then, next is, must be able to hide and seek a bride. Brings attention how while the poem's meaning should not be in a clear vision. So, it should be indicating, it should not be completely absurd to the point it is lost, as well as indicating that it should draw the audience attention like how bride seeks the attention on a special day. So, ayan. So, must be able to hide and seek like a bride. So, kung mapapansin nyo, diba, kadalasan sa mga poem, pag binabasa natin, hindi natin kagad naiintindihan kung ano yung gustong iparating, diba? So, nangyayari, napapaisip tayo kung ano yung ibig sabihin nun. Para siyang bugtong na kailangan nating mahulaan. So, ayun lang yung dyan. Next is, last one na siya. Ayan, so, and over God smiling from the poem. So, poem's cover shows that the writer of the poem will be the God of the poem and has free rule over the poem instead of something obstructing his ability to create freely throughout the poem. So the word must is used 8 times. So this shows the writer compassion as how strongly he feels that all writers should follow the guidelines above in the poem writing. So ayun, pwede nyo siyang sundan. Ayan. Yung pinaka-poem. So, pwede siyang maging guide sa pagsusulat nyo, diba? So, kung meron dito, may mga mahilig sumulat ng poem. So, pwede nyo siyang gawing guide. Okay? Para mas gumanda yung poem na gagawin nyo. Okay? Then, if you are writing a poem, any genre of literature, because you want to capture a feeling that you experience, maximize your creativity. So, ayan. Gamitin nyo yung pagiging creativity nyo, especially on the use of language. Ayan. So, the use of beautiful language in the text determines the effective and correct meaning of the expression. Ayan. Next. So, ayan. So, aside from understanding literary text through biographical perspective, it is also important to note the year or period. Ayan. And so, wait. Ayan. So, meron akong activity dito. Ayan. So, this is the instructions. Recall the timeline of Philippine history. So, reflect on some events that may have transpired during those periods of time by creating a visual image that represent of each of them. So, ito siya. Ito yung image. So, ayan. Meron ba kayo, familiar ba kayo sa image? Ayan. So, ayan. Yung year na 1882, anong nangyari niyan? Anong event? 1898, 1972, 1986, and the last is 2016. Familiar ba kayo? Ayan. So, bigyan ko kayo ng 2 minutes para ma-recall nyo kung ano na yan na event na yan. Okay, 10 minutes. Okay, so tignan natin kung tama yung sagot ninyo. Okay, so yung una, yung 1882. So, ito yung time na kung saan si Rizal, a well-known hero of the day, leaves for Spain to pursue his studies. And next is 1898. Ito naman yung Americans introduce formal education in the Philippines. Ayun yung year na yun. Next year is 1972. And Ferdinand Marcos declared a martial law in the Philippines. And then, 1986, ito naman yung People Power Revolution took place among the Filipino people. And then, 2016 is Rodrigo or President Rodrigo Digong Duterte was elected the 16th President of the Philippine Republic. So, ayun yung mga date na, yung mga sagot. So, what is the connection? May connection neto dun sa di-discuss natin or sa topic natin. Okay, so what is sociocultural context? So, this is an evident when literary words, sociocultural context is evident when literary works respond in some way to the society in which they were written, and most often, though not always, that response takes the form of criticism. So, sociocultural context is about how a particular literary works depict society. So, ayun, tandaan niyo society. Sources you might investigate include works, books, articles. So, of history or sociology. So, that talks about the strengths, weaknesses, and changes occurring in the society during the period in which the literary works is set, and critical works that emphasize the connection between the society and the literary works. So, paano ba naging related sa context ang sociocultural? So, kapag yung literary works na discuss about society, economics, politics, cultural forces, that is social-cultural context. Okay? So, next. How we can analyze a text through a sociocultural context. So, here are guide questions that you may answer when you are reading literature through the sociocultural context. So, first is, what is the relationship between the characters or the speaker in the text and their society? So, ano daw yung connection or relationship ng character or yung speaker sa text sa society? Okay? Next, does the text explicitly address issues of gender, ayan, races or class? How does the text resolve these issues? Ayan. So, pinag-uusapan ba dito about issue ng gender, race, ayan, or class? How does the story reflect the nation? So, what does this say about the country and its inhabitants? Ayan, so, yun yung mga possible questions or guide questions pala. So, example ng socio-cultural context. So, last time, di ba, pina-assignment sa inyo yung, nakakabasa na pala ako, or ABNKKBA, BSNPLA. Ako, kasi yun, by Babong. Tama? So, napanood nyo na ako ano yung pinaka-story. So, alam ko ako, nabasa ko to, hindi napanood ko rin siya, pero sobrang tagal na nung time na yun. So, parang college, first year college or second year college pa ata ako nung napanood ko siya. Kaya medyo hindi na, sa akin. Ayan. Pero, tungkol ba siya saan? So, nakakabasa pala ako is, by Babong. So, it depicts the Filipino culture and although in a humorous way, reveals the social realities. So, ito yung mga pangyayari talaga sa society and issues that remain present up until now, namely education. So, lalong-lalo na sa education natin. Ito yung talagang nangyayari ngayon. Kaya noon pa man, nangyayari din siya hanggang sa ngayon. Okay? So, namely education, economy, corruption, up until now, personal struggle. So, problem pa rin natin yan, lahat ng yan. So, sa economy, corruption, ayan. So, the author leaves audiences with advice regarding life and school in general. So, dito sa story ng nakakabasa na pala ako, yung pinaka-summary niya is pinapakita niya yung buhay ng simpleng bata katulad ninyo. So, tulad na lamang ng mga nilalarong mga laro noon. So, pinapakita niya din yung buhay ng mga nararanasan ng batang mag-aaral sa isang public elementary school. Diba? So, pinapaliwanag din kung ano yung pinapaliwanag or pinapakita doon kung paano sila tumatawid ng river tuwing papasok. So, nung siya ay nakagraduate sa high school na bilang isang normal na mag-aaral, siya ay nag-cutting classes at nanood ng sine kasama yung mga classmates. So, ayun, nangyayari naman talaga yun sa tunay na buhay. Alam ko, meron sa inyong ganun. So, nagka-cutting. So, kung saan-saan pupunta ng mall. Okay? So, buti na lang ngayon, siya, diba? So, lalong-lalo na sa LCC kasi malapit sa Star Mall. Pero hindi kayo nakakapasok, syempre. Lalo na kung hindi, wala pang alas 3 ata. Sa 3 p.m. yata yung doon. Pwedeng pumasok na yung estudyante. Ayan. Then, so, yun yung mga hindi niya makakalimutan. So, sa high school, syempre, hindi maiiwasan yung mga takdang aralin or mga assignment na ginagawa lamang tuwing umaga at pati na rin ang mga dahilan na sinasabi sa teacher. Ay, diba? Yung mga palusot nyo, diba? Ayun. So, alam ko, napanood nyo to, nakarelate kayo. Diba? Nakakatawa siya, pero yun yung talagang nangyayari sa totoong buhay. So, nabanggit din niya yung pinaka-importante sa high school life niya, which is yung JS prom, kung saan nandun yung special someone niya. So, ayan. So, syempre, pagkatapos ng high school, nag-college naman siya, nag-apply siya ng kanyang nag-apply sila ng mga kaibigan niya sa isang university. Pero kahit college na, hindi pa rin maiiwasan ang pagiging late at absent. Pero kahit siya ay ganun pa rin, nagporsige siya hanggang siya ay naging isang guro. So, doon niya nalaman na hindi pala madali ang pagiging isang guro. Okay? So, ayan. So, yun yung pinaka doon. So, syempre sa buhay, kahit na napakarami mong nakuhang awards, ayan. So, hindi pa rin magiging sapat yun. Lalo na kapag sumabak ka na sa totoong buhay talaga. Or sa buhay na pagtatrabaho. So, lalo na kung magiging teacher ka. Hindi ko na sinasabi huwag kayo maging teacher. Pero kung gusto nyo talaga, yun yung calling nyo or yun yung gusto nyo talagang kunin, okay lang naman. Diba? Yan, masarap maging guro, lalo na kapag mahal ka ng mga estudyante mo. Yan. At nire-respeto. Okay? So, next tayo. So, next is yung story ni Ben Sincol. So, Ben Sincol is a 2001 novel written by Filipino national artist Francisco Chanel Jose. It is about Benjamin or Ben Sincol, who is described as perhaps the most interesting character created by the author. So, based on Jose's novel, Sincor is a renowned novelist who wrote the book entitled Pain, an autobiography written during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. So, through the fictional novel, Sincor recalled the hardships experienced by Filipinos during the occupation. So, Sincol was described to be a coward or a supot or an uncircumcised man. So, alam niyo naman kung ano yung tinatawag na supot, diba? Ito yung mga hindi pa natutuli. So, who did not only run away from such ritual of manhood, but also invaded his foxhole in Bataan. Alam niyo yung foxhole? Ito yung yung may mga butas sa ilalim ng yung mga butas na nung Japanese period, doon nagtatago yung mga Filipino. So, when the Japanese soldiers were closing in, Sincol was a runner or invader. So, runner siya, ayan, madalas siya tumatakbo dahil nga duwag siya. So, throughout much of his lifetime, while being hunted by the poverty of his boyhood and the treachery that he may have committed in the past in 1982. So, Sincol began receiving letters from Japanese named Haruko Kitamura. So, hindi ko na siya So, paano siya naging socio-cultural context? So, syempre dyan, binanggit kung anong period, diba? So, during the Japanese period. So, ayan, may date pa siyang 1982. So, ano ba yung pinagdaanan nila? Ano yung klase ng buhay meron sila during the Japanese period, sorry. Ayan. So, that's it. So for your activity, so read the story entitled Pinikas by Jason Parba and answer the questions. Write your answer in your notebook or yellow paper. So first question is, what is the story all about? What part of the story shows sociocultural context? Cite an instance in the story. Next, based on the story, how does this show about the characteristics of Filipinos? Then next is, in your notebook, answer the following question. What is linguistic context? What is sociocultural context? What is the concern of linguistic context? Why do you need to consider the society in understanding the literary text? Why do writers need to use simple language? And so that's it. Thank you and God bless.